By the 1950s, Eugene Goossens was at the height of his career. He was both chief conductor of the Sydney Symphony Orchestra and director of the New South Wales State Conservatorium. He earned more than the Prime Minister and used his celebrity to dominate Australia's cultural landscape. Goossens played the media game well. Here at Cooper Park, crowds of 20,000 attended his outdoor concerts, an incredible number for a cultural event. But indoors, the conductor had a secret life, one that would soon be exposed. And in the anti-intellectual Australia of the 1950s, when a tall poppy fell, they fell an awfully long way. These are the images that triggered the conductor's disgrace. In 1952, he bought a copy of The Art of Rosaleen Norton. The book combined her grotesque erotic art with the poetry of a young lover, Gavin Greenless. Goossens himself had a lifelong secret interest in pantheism and the occult. Norton's art spoke in a language he understood. He wrote to her and was invited to tea at Norton's seedy flat in Sydney's notorious King's Cross. These are police photographs taken inside Rosaleen Norton's flat in 1955. They've not been shown in public until now. Third-hand furniture, cheap drapes, a makeshift altar. It was here that Goossens took part in occult rituals and conducted an affair of some intensity with Norton. A sequence of unrelated events unfolded at Norton's flat that would soon envelop Goossens.
Well, two young fellows were hawking some photographs around amongst the newspapers, trying to get the papers to buy them, and eventually they went to the Sun, and the fellow from the Sun got in touch with the chief of the vice squad of the day, and he detailed me to go down and collect the photographs and then continue on with the inquiry. And I found out that they were photographs of Rosaleen Norton and Gavin Greenless, and that they had come from their witch's coven at the Cross.
Detective Trevenna kept copies of these pictures until his death last year. They're decidedly unpleasant, but no more than comical by today's standards of pornography. Far more interesting for the Vice Squad was the fact that they already held evidence connecting Goossens with Rosaleen Norton.
Well, I had recovered some letters in his handwriting, written by him to Norton. He'd signed them.
Roie Witch, you came to me early this morning about 1:45. I realised by a delicious orificial tingling that you were about to make your presence felt.
These extraordinary letters were patiently transcribed at the Vice Squad office in Balmain. They confirm that Goossens had an active sexual relationship with Norton.
We have many rituals and indulgences to undertake. Even now, my bat wings envelop and lift you.
And there are frequent appeals to Norton's discretion.
Anonymity is still best. Destroy all this.
But she didn't. Norton kept a bundle of Goossens' letters stuffed behind her sofa in Brougham Street. Joe Morris, a crime reporter for The Sun, had infiltrated the coven, stolen the letters and then handed them over to police. Goossens himself was now their target.
I gathered more evidence, but unfortunately, before I was able to effect an arrest on that occasion, he'd left the country and gone on a concert tour to Britain and the continent.
The highlight of that trip was a visit to Buckingham Palace. But a knighthood wasn't the only thing Goossens picked up in London. The Sun newspaper had Sir Eugene followed during his stay. They learned he'd been making some discreet purchases from sex shops in Soho.
Joe rang me, I think he rang me at home from memory, and said that friend of ours that's overseas is coming back on the Qantas flight so-and-so from London. Then he said he was carrying a briefcase, and his information was that briefcase probably had indecent photographs in that he had in fact bought.
Sir Eugene's Qantas Constellation approached Sydney in light rain early on the morning of March the 9th, 1956. It was the day that would change his life. Waiting for Goossens was quite a posse. Detective Trevenna, Ron Walden, head of the Vice Squad, the Chief of Customs in Sydney, Nat Craig, and a photographer from The Sun.
I was standing out on the tarmac waiting for him to come in so I could keep him under observation so that he couldn't get rid of anything that he might have had. And then that affected the customs search, questioned him and asked him if he had anything else to declare apart from what was on the declaration. And to that he said, no, nothing. And that's it. What's in that? It indicated the briefcase. And so it's only my musical scores. And Nat said, well, I've got to have a look at it.
Bag by bag, the customs officers opened and searched the conductor's luggage. They found a large amount of what was considered pornographic material. Photographs, prints, books, a spool of film, plus some rubber masks and sticks of incense. There was more than enough evidence to support a charge of prohibited imports under the Customs Act.
Nat Craig took possession of all of the indecent literature and stuff, of course, and we just went into the CIB. I told Walden that I was there and that we were going to question his nibs about his association with Norton and Greenless. Yes, I showed him the photographs and the letters, all of the information I had. I showed them all to him.
Not quite knowing how the case would be resolved, Detective Trevenna carefully kept his transcript of that interview. Even by current standards, it was a remarkably frank exchange.
I said, do you know a woman named Rosaleen Norton? He said, yes. I've known her and Gavin for some time. I said there was repeated mention of SM rights between you and Norton and Greenlees made in your letters. What is that? He said, that is sex magic. It is a symbolic ceremony involving sex stimulation. I said, how is that rite conducted? He said, we undressed and sat on the floor in a circle. Miss Norton conducted the verbal part of the rite, and I then performed the sexual stimulation on her. I said, how did you do that? He said, I placed my tongue in her sexual organ and kept moving it until I stimulated it.
Well, the obvious thing was that he was going to be charged with scandalous conduct because that was the appropriate offence for that sort of thing. Now, if people do things in private that outrage public decency, regardless of the fact that they occurred in private, then the charge can be brought. Scandalous conduct is a nasty offence. I mean, he could have been looking at a jail sentence of some years if he'd been convicted.
The fall was swift. Goossens stood down from his positions with both the Sydney Symphony and the Conservatorium. The next day, police arrived at the conductor's home to serve him with a summons on the customs charge. Goossens was fined £100, the maximum for a breach of the Customs Act. There was now nothing else to do but resign both his positions, sell up and return to England. The collapse of Goossens' Australian career was a personal tragedy, yet it was triggered solely by the material seized from his luggage at Sydney Airport. Nothing of his involvement in the hanky-panky with Rosaleen Norton here in King's Cross was ever made public. Meanwhile, the far more serious charge of scandalous conduct against Goossens was never brought. Why not?
See, there's nothing said in the customs proceedings about Rosie Norton or the Witches' Covenant or anything else. But it soon became known, very quickly became known that that was the real thrust of the matter.
I submitted my report with all of the evidence for the Attorney-General through the police prosecutors. And while we were waiting to be interviewed, or waiting to see the Attorney-General, we were sitting in the anteroom, and the Commissioner, Mr Delaney, stormed along the passageway, and after a while he came back out again and he just flicked his head to us to follow him. And it was outside there that Mr Delaney told me that I'd been dudded. He said they're not going to issue a warrant and that they weren't going to proceed.
Without a warrant, there could be no arrest, no exposure of Sir Eugene's relationship with Norton, no sort of display of the evidence, no revelation of other prominent names. Nothing. At a stroke, the New South Wales government had closed ranks and brought Goossens' public humiliation to an end.
I think that there are quite a few occasions in the enforcement of the criminal law where if someone is good enough to leave the country, charges aren't proceeded with.
On May 26th, just 10 weeks after his fateful arrival at the same airport, Sir Eugene slipped out of Mascot on a flight to London via Rome. He travelled incognito as Mr. E. Gray. It was his 63rd birthday. Before leaving, Goossens sent his friends this extraordinary Ronioed letter. In it he claimed he'd been forced to bring the prohibited matter into Australia as a result of persistent menaces involving others. But Goossens never provided any evidence to support those allegations.